Dear Professor, it was our pleasure to host you here at the Pontifical University of John Paul II and to hear your speech about fractured image of Poland in contemporary American media. So, what is the missing in the spread, in the information spread by American media about Polish people and about Poland in general?
Well, I think a number of things. Thank you for saying that, and it's very nice to be here, by the way. I've been to Krakow multiple times, never to the university, so it is really nice to be here. This is gorgeous. What's missing? I think, I suggested in my talk that what's missing is any serious long-form journalism that really takes readers into the history of Poland, frankly, into the history of Central Europe. Most Americans are educated in such a way that our historical knowledge really maybe goes as far as the English Channel. Maybe we know a little bit about France and maybe Italy because there are so many Italian Americans and so forth. But by and large, anything east of Berlin really is terra incognita. We really just don't know and aren't presented with much knowledge about it. The best journalism really does make an effort to give us some history. Even if it's not a story that's about history, it will contain lengthy, perhaps, summaries of the long history of Poland and its institutions, its people, its role in world affairs. That tends only to be restricted now to essentially World War II, right? Poland was the site in which World War II happened in some ways, and then maybe the worst of things happened with the Nazi death camps, right? So that tends to be the extent of it. So there's a lack of that broad historical knowledge of the history of Poland. There's also, as I suggested as well, the news tends to focus on the major cities, the major urban areas, Warsaw, obviously, Krakow. And so most Americans have little appreciation for the diversity of Poland, the diversity of language. Like there are Kashubians. Who are the Kashubians, right? And so forth. So that's maybe asking a bit too much for journalism to get too fine grained. But it wouldn't hurt to give us a bit more of a sense of the diversity of Polish culture, Polish traditions, Polish customs, Polish regions. And then I think, especially, and this was the main point, the American media, in covering Poland and in covering almost everything outside the United States, tends to reflect our own prejudices. It tends to reflect our own preconceptions, right? So it's call it a framework, call it a box. And the story has to fit into that box or else it doesn't get told. And so the box in the United States right now is our democracy is fundamentally under threat. We're about to see, we're in the midst of a massive political crisis. Will our institutions survive? And so that tends to be the framing, the way the lens, if you will, we're speaking to cameras here, that tends to be the lens through which everything else. And so if the story from Poland reflects that lens, then it gets told. But then it gets distorted, though, because it's made to cater to American preconceptions already. So at the end of the day, what do we learn? Really nothing. We learn how our own problems seem to be reflected in the problems of others, whether that's true or not.
You also told us a bit more about lack of local voices.
Yes.
Could you tell something more about this concept?
One of the major changes in the last, I would say, certainly 30 years, last 3 decades, is the loss of local news reporting. Almost every major, frankly, the loss of newspapers. Almost every major city in the United States had not only 1, but 2, and sometimes even 3 newspapers. 1 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 2 in the evening. And in addition, they also had reporters that covered local stories from across the state or across their region. In addition to that, there were small village or town newspapers. Sometimes they were free of charge. They were supported entirely by advertising revenue, not subscription. Those are almost entirely disappearing. In my own state of Minnesota, there was just a report that was released that mentioned the close of at least a half a dozen more small town newspapers. Now, what's the issue? People say, well, we can get the same kind of news through Facebook. We can get the same kind of news on social media. Yes and no. yes and no. You can get news about when St. Hedwig's is having its fish fry, yes, but there are no longer any journalists or reporters who are present on a regular basis at the city council meetings, who are questioning, maybe holding elected officials to account. So, in effect, the press has long, in the United States, has long had the service, or provided the service of an accountability check, right? Someone was elected to public office. They said they would do X, Y, and Z. Are they doing that, right? So someone's watching, in other words. So with the loss of the local media, there's an important set of eyes that are no longer there. And Facebook and the other social media sites are not yet, if they ever will be, they're not really a substitute for that.
So you don't think that the, let's say, citizens or the users of social media can replace professional journalists, right?
No, and the main reason is what everyone already knows. What shows up in my social media feed is what the algorithm, what Facebook thinks I want to watch. I'm never going to be confronted with something spontaneous, something new, something that the algorithm doesn't think I already want to know or to hear. So in that sense, it's unlike the old newspaper where I would open the page, I'm speaking old-fashioned, right? But even on a website, to read through the coverage of my local paper, I have to read stories about things that I otherwise wouldn't see if it was simply on my social media feed.
But also professional media use agenda setting for that, so maybe...
There's no escaping bias, and that's true. I think what the local papers used to provide was a little bit more of a critical eye than I think social media tends to. But it's the beginning. We don't know how this is going to all work out.
Okay. So the last question, you talked to us about the image of Poland.
Yes.
And could you describe in few words the image of three Cs countries? Or this term
it's like
doesn't
the
exist?
professor from Bulgaria said. There's practically zero knowledge of Central Europe as really even a concept or a region. There's some vague, for those old enough to remember the so-called Warsaw Pact, what we used to call East Europe, right, which was dominated by the communist bloc, right? So there are those who remember that and might be, oh yeah, okay, the three Cs countries, oh yeah, that's the old communist bloc, right? Okay, yes and no, but that's about the extent of it. So it has its own kind of its own region, its own set of interests. The knowledge of that is practically zero among the average American. I mean, to be honest, there's a knowledge that there's something called the European Union, obviously, and that's a region with its own economic, cultural interests and so forth. And there's a great deal of travel back and forth, but Eastern Europe, less so. Oh, I think signs of that may be changing. I think signs of that slowly changing. Partially because the travel is easier because of the Schengen zone, because of the ease of traveling across borders. So we may be seeing changes. Many of my friends, plan visits to Prague, for example, or to Krakow. Frankly, is becoming a destination, and Poland is, I think, becoming more of a travel destination, and then along the Danube. So it's changing, but slowly.
Lots of American right now try to interest in this region, right? But what we, the Poles and also other countries can do to promote the idea of three Cs and other regional cooperation?
I just think whenever there's an opportunity, if one's being interviewed, if there's an opportunity to mention the three Cs, it should be mentioned. If there's an opportunity to mention Central Europe as a coherent reality that is increasingly aware of its interdependence, that should be grabbed. And again, whenever possible, to make mention of the initiative in any kind of contact with an American media source. Hey, are you familiar with the three Cs initiative? No, I'd never heard of it. Well, let me you have a moment? Let's sit down and I'll tell you more about it.
Okay, and let's hope also that the events like this will
Yes.
promote this kind of
This is
idea.
immensely helpful. It's how it always starts, right? It starts small and then grows. Yeah.
Hopefully it will be as well with this event. Thank you
Yes.
so much
Thank you.
for talk.
Thank you.